Okay, welcome back to our third session for the Global Sports Business Summit. We talked a little bit or heard a little bit about AI in our last panel. Well, this is going to be focused on AI analytics and automation, the tech revolutionizing sports business. This section will spotlight how cutting-edge technologies like artificial intelligence, advanced data analytics, and automation are transforming the business and the landscape of competitive sports. And our panelists will explore the practical impact of data-driven decision-making, the latest trends in tech adoption, the future implications for teams, leagues, and fan experiences. And so it is my pleasure to turn it over to our moderator, Allison, VP of Insights and Analytics at Multiplier.
I gotta make sure this is on. Yes. Hello. Thank you so much for joining our panel, AI Analytics and Automation, the Tech Revolutionizing Sports Business. As she said, I'm Allison. I am VP of Insights and Analytics at Multiplier. If you were in here for the Sponsorship 2.0 panel, then you saw Kern Egan, our CEO, and talked a little bit about some of the work that we do together. But I work with all of our brands and help them to use analytics to build brands and culture. So we're going to dive into how emerging technologies like AI and automation and advanced analytics are really reshaping the way that sports organizations operate. I'm going to have everybody introduce themselves, and I'll start here with Brandon.
Hello, good afternoon. Brandon Nutting, VP of Data Science for MVP Index, a sponsorship measurement platform that Lauren's heard of once or twice.
I was there for 10 years.
Hi, Adam Grossman, founder and managing director of Revenue Over and Above Replacement, or ROAR for short, which is obviously a mouthful. Former CEO and founder of Block 6 Analytics, which was acquired by Excel Sports Management in 2021.
Hi, Katie Morgan, Vice President of Business Analytics and Ticket Strategy for the Texas Rangers. I've been with the club for 17 seasons, was fortunate enough to be there in 2023 for the World Series. And to address the elephant in the room, yes, I have a black eye. If AI were involved in playing with my 4-year-old, I would have known to watch out for her elbow, but that is not the case.
Thank you for joining us despite your UFC injury. So I really appreciate this awesome group of just brilliant introverts for joining me on stage to talk about these subjects as experts. The first question I think that we need to discuss, because it's kind of buzzy with the last couple of years with the advancements of AI, we need to talk about what it is and not just how it applies to sports business. But let's start with the basics. Brandon, do you want to use your professor voice and explain to us what AI is?
Yeah, it's really at scale math. That's the way that I'll boil it down. So the way I was thinking about this question earlier, because we kind of talked about this, when you think about the history of everything that we've done that requires a ton of math, you think about like the space race, and everyone likes to joke that we went to the moon with like less computing power than we have in our pocket. It's not exactly true. We had a lot of human computers that made that possible, that all had to work behind the scenes doing very complex calculations. And as computers have evolved and we've been able to do more complex calculations, we've just added more to them. So AI is really at scale math that has been thought about for years and years and years. But the idea, you sit down and say, wouldn't it be cool if we could do this? And you say this would take 20 years to do with math. Now all of the computers have caught up. So a lot of what we know of as AI is really complex math problems at scale. And there's a lot of really interesting pieces, and I could obviously spend a ton of time talking about all the different types of AI and how it all is, but it's all just math at scale with computers that are allowed to do that or able to do that in a much bigger way. So you'll notice that over time we keep talking about things like NVIDIA and all these, because those are systems that are evolving to continue to push more complex at scale math, which is making it more possible to do more and more cool math things. So that's the most basic version of what we're talking about, is math in a way that's packaged and easy to understand. And the other piece that's been exciting is it's all become usable by everybody. These things were all kind of closed off to people who knew how to use the math. And the advancements that we're seeing now have allowed everybody to be able to have a hand in using the math in a scalable way.
And a lot of you have probably, your first interaction with AI that you know of is maybe ChatGPT or using some kind of image generation software, maybe helping you take notes, having a robot join your meetings and take notes for you. Adam, let's talk a little bit about how AI is being applied in sports business today.
Yeah, we talked about this a little bit in our call before the panel, but I think AI often can seem like a solution looking for a problem, and I think sports actually has a lot of problems that are well suited for AI. So even before, like, if people are familiar, I assume now with ChatGPT and everything that ChatGPT can do, that's generative AI. That's one form of AI in sports. There have been chatbots for a long time in sports. There's many companies, but one, Satisfy Lab, was developing a chatbot for sports as early as at least 2016, and actually before that. So the idea of having chatbots has been around for a long time. My previous company, and this is something MVP, obviously you should be talking about this more than me, but using computer vision, basically you can think of that teaching a computer how to see, and particularly to identify logos in video. That's something that is a big use case in sports, particularly for sports partnerships, whether it's coming to naming rights deals, jersey patch deals, marquee partnerships, being able to identify when a logo appears on television, when it appears television, streaming, social media. Those are all things that computers can do. The other one that we used to use at Block 6 is called natural language processing. So you can think of that, this is a little stylistic, or not totally accurate, but thinking like teaching a computer how to read and read text. So we focused on sentiment analysis, so you could actually read text to see how positive or negative something is. And one of the things that one of common questions in sports is, why do sports partnerships in the first place? It is the emotionality, it's the human connection with sports. Well, that can seem like a very qualitative thing. Like, how do you know how somebody actually feels about sports? Well, you could actually use a quantitative approach to say, what are they actually saying, particularly saying organically in social media? And you could actually put a score on that. So using natural language processing to understand what fans are saying. We actually previously developed a way to, based on what people are saying, to identify who they are on a demographic basis across multiple attributes. So there's a lot of things that AI can do. Obviously, we're going to talk more about that on this panel, but sports in particular, whether it's fan engagement, understanding the value of sponsorship, understanding ticket sales, understanding consumption patterns in media, there's a lot of challenges where AI is really applicable, and I think you'll see an increasing amount of use cases of AI in sports going forward.
And Katie, I think this dovetails nicely into a question for you. So broader than just AI, but also inclusive of AI, how have AI analytics and automation really changed the way that the Texas Rangers as a sports organization is operating?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think at the root of it, it's made us more efficient. A lot of what we do is using AI at its core. So you think about machine learning, and that's a lot about what Adam just talked about. But we've been using predictive models for the last 10 years. You know, there's languages out there. Maybe it's R, maybe it's Python. But we've been doing that for the last 10 years to help better predict what our ticket sales are going to look like, what revenue is going to look like across the board for various reasons. But we've started integrating it even more efficiently into dynamic pricing. Everybody should be familiar with that. It's been in the airline and the hotel industry for years. And sports finally got our foot in the door probably 5 to 10 years ago, where we've become very efficient in terms of dynamic pricing and making sure that we are putting prices into the market that really capture a fan's attention. But I also think from an efficiency standpoint, we are putting new tools in the hands of our sales reps, things like Conversica, which is an AI sales assistant, or we signed on recently with a company called Lavender that makes our emails more efficient. It's really allowed both my team from an analytics perspective, but also our revenue generators be more efficient. They can make more phone calls. We can get smarter from an analytics perspective because we can do more things now as well.
So as far as, sports organizations leveraging this new technology for sponsorships and new revenue streams, Brandon, are there ways that you've seen them be able to harness just the fact that they're able to have these AI-generated analytics at the palm of their hand?
Yeah, it depends on how you look at the different sides of it and angles of it. But one of the things that we're trying to move a lot of our industry, and Adam's as well, was looking at sort of the post-sale. So you sell something, you go out, the game happens, you have this revenue, and then you report off to a sponsorship at the end of the season. We're trying to help flip that a little bit, because what we really want to do is like make the sports industry a little bit more money on the side. So a lot of what we're able to do is help them figure out how to generate more revenue on the front end instead of doing all of the measurement on the back end. So one particular example, and I'll leave the team name off for a second, a competitor of yours, they put in a new behind home plate look over this past season, which if you're a big baseball person, you probably can figure out who it is already. But in doing so, they worked with us to be able to better, hey, we have all of these different pieces of signage, we're blowing all of that up and we're starting all over. Here's a new way that we want it to look. And we could actually train a model to do that and run it against their entire last season and say, if your behind home plate had looked like this is how much exposure each one of these would have had. And here's how much that would have been worth from a media exposure value over the course of an entire season. So before they ever tore one seat out, they can understand how to translate everything they had sold before to their new deal packages, which was super important because they moved a bunch of stuff around with some of their naming rights and where they put different logos and everything, and wanted to be able to tell them, hey, we're moving you from this asset that you love to this asset. It's going to give you far more exposure, far more media value over the course of the season, according to this analytics company. So you don't have to be upset, even though we know you like this one place you've been over the course of the last few seasons. So we could do all of that before they ever had to do anything, and they can make changes before they ever tore anything apart and decided what road they were going down. And they could update all of their pricing models on their side and all of their rate cards based on what the new season was going to give without having to go through that test season to be able to then deliver those analytics. So that's just one example I can think of off the top of my head.
I think it's really important to note, though, going back to the question that I was originally asked, is analysis like that makes teams incredibly proactive rather than reactive. We've consistently lived in a state of reaction where we're trying to find the numbers to go back to a partner and say, your signage was worth this amount. Great job. You had a great valuation this year. But companies like what Brandon was speaking of allows us to be incredibly proactive. And Dom, who's on my team sitting right over there, he's our partnerships analyst, and he does a lot of what Brandon just mentioned, and we're moving into that proactive state that makes our partnerships team that much more competitive with other teams in market or other events in market, and we're moving out of reactivity into being incredibly proactive because of companies like Brandon's.
Yeah, and I think the main thesis of the question about revenue generation, obviously that's obviously no better than anybody from a sports property perspective, is about revenue generation. And if you're going to make these investments, what's the return on investment? How is it going to drive new revenue? And I think one thing that these tools do allow is not only looking at individual revenue streams like partnerships, but overlapping multiple different revenue streams to maximize, revenue that's from a data-driven perspective. So you're able to look at multiple data sets. So, we're one of the things that we're looking at Roar is fan engagement and really understanding where the fan is from. How does a fan consume something on broadcast television? How does it interact with social media? How does it interact with the team? And then how does it actually make a transaction? And putting that all together in a single, really understanding the fan. Well, that has applicability to partnerships. It has applicability to ticket sales. It has applicability to media consumption. I think one of the things, particularly on the media consumption side, which I was curious to hear your feedback, both of your feedback about, is the atomization of media channels across, there's in this market, obviously there's Victory, there's multiple streaming platforms. How do you find where everything is? Well, you can use an AI agent as a fan to tell you where it is, show you where the broadcast is, and potentially even right from the AI agent finding it for you, you could click on a link and you could go exactly and start to pay for the service, and either on a per game or monthly or some kind of longer term basis. So there's a lot of ways that, again, AI in sports can directly lead to monetization, which is more difficult in other industries. And I think that's why AI is so important, particularly for the sports and media industry, and explicitly for the most important revenue stream, or one of the most important revenue streams, well, I would say all of the revenue streams, particularly ticket sales, media rights, and partnerships, that can all be directly impacted by artificial intelligence in ways that lead to direct monetization and increases of revenue.
Just to follow another thing that I probably should have thought of right out of the gate was, the direct-to-consumer market, like you just brought up, but the interesting part is eliminating waste. So the NHL is like a really good example of this. They launched their digitally enhanced dashboard program this past 3 seasons ago now. And if you're a hockey fan, you probably already know what I'm talking about. If you're not, bear with me here for a second. But the idea is if you're watching a game, the Dallas Stars play I'll just call the Florida Panthers for a second, for understanding's sake. If you're watching in Florida, in the traditional model, all of those dashboards along the ice were all Dallas market brands and whatever, like you bought this dashboard. So the NHL released the ability to put in virtual on the feed. So now you can sell to the Florida side. So if you're watching in Florida, you now have Florida brands on the screen. If you're watching in Dallas, you have Dallas brands, which makes a ton of sense because you can dual sell everything. It makes even more sense when you realize that, and like one of the panelists 2 ago that's from Canada, there was a lot of waste between Canada and the United States. It's a little bit, you can say there's some overlap between Florida brands and Dallas brands. There's pretty much no overlap between Canadian brands and US brands, which I found very interesting. Like Tim Hortons is just now moving into the US, right? It's a brand that Canadians love. It's their coffee. So their ability to dual sell now, they can have a naming rights partner for the Canadian teams for All-Star, and they can have a separate one for the United States teams, and they can both be car brands. It doesn't matter anymore because when you turn it on in the US, you're seeing one car brand. When you turn it on in Canada, you're seeing another one. And that requires a ton of artificial intelligence to do. It requires to find those boards and replace them and keep tabs on all the feeds that are going out to each individual network. So that's one way that they are using that for a huge impact on revenue stream to be able to eliminate waste across every channel that they run. And every game has up to 5 or more feeds that run for every single game that are all separate revenue streams for that individual game.
That dovetails really nicely into the next question. So, in what ways are you seeing AI and analytics transforming the fan experience, both in stadium and digitally, just from the perspective of personalized experiences?
So I can start from an in-stadium perspective, and there's a couple of ways that I want to address this. First, with the All-Star game that we hosted in 2024, we actually introduced an AI robot that is a bartender. He's still in the stadium. You can walk up to him. He will mix your drink for you and hand it to you. And that's an experience that we had not had prior to last year. It just adds a little bit of automation and a little bit of fun for our fans. It's one of the places that most people go. It's on the main concourse if you'd like to visit it. But that's one way that we think about that. But also, we are better understanding crowd behavior. And we do that through cameras that are installed in our stadium. We utilize a company that then will track individuals as they are in our stadium, and we will better understand their path. So we already understood when they got to parking lots, when they scanned into our stadium, but once they entered the ballpark, we weren't sure where they went. Most of our concessions transactions currently are anonymized. We're trying to change that with the usage of a mobile wallet. But this company that we're utilizing allows us now to understand a few things. One, when are fans getting to their seats? Are they seeing partnership signage up on the Jumbotron in between innings? We also are better understanding who's actually in our stadium. As most of you are probably aware, if you're coming with a group of 4 people to Globe Life Field, you're not always forwarding those tickets to whoever's going to be in the stadium. If you're together, you're just scanning all 4 and you're going in. Well, we lose the ability to understand who's in the stadium because we're only looking at the attributes of the person that purchased the ticket. So now what we have learned is that our in-stadium crowd is actually about 5 to 6 years younger than the purchaser of those tickets. So that makes us more dynamic from a marketing perspective. We can better target the appropriate people to also make them purchasers and not just attenders. The other thing that we see is we can monitor the merchandise that people in our stadium are wearing. So when we launched our City Connect program 2 years ago, every Friday game, we wore our City Connect jerseys, and we really wanted to understand what that was doing, not only from a merchandise sales perspective, but also who was actually wearing that merchandise to our games and in our stadium. Was it hitting the mark? Did it target a younger demographic? And crowd behavioral platforms allowed us to do that. And AI is integrated in that. That's how we get all of those metrics because of the recognition component that is anonymized. And as everybody knows, Texas has very strict laws in terms of facial recognition, but it's done in a way that allows us to understand it at an aggregate level.
Yeah, well, your thesis of the question. Well, first, before Bray, I hope there's a company that will someday come along that'll make that kind of sponsorships across geography and more easily done. Maybe there is a company coming soon, so stay tuned for that. But in terms of your question, Lauren, it really is about personalization, right? That's the holy grail, right? Is that you get the content you want, when you want it, how you want it, on the device that you want it, whether it's in person or digitally or through some kind of streaming platform. But the idea is, AI is really potentially good. Exactly what you were saying. I should also. My son's favorite book is about the moon, so I now know a lot about the computing that went into the moon, but and that's enough, I guess, plugs for myself for now. But the main thing from a personal that AI will allow you to do is like what we're talking about, or what I was just talking about, is personalization, and in particular, from a partnership is a good example, right? You were talking about a dashboard on the broadcast. Well, in theory, you could do that on an individual level. So each individual person could see each individual, if you had information about what they purchased in the venue, you had information about what their buying habits were. You could actually get targeted ads down to the household level or down to the individual level. So it wouldn't just be on every street, every cable company would get it, but potentially at that level. And then to your point about like having personalized experiences at the venue, but that's we have students here. You're obviously allegedly the people who want all this content personalization, and it's. As people get younger, as they have more choices, they're expecting a different experience, and AI can help to do that because of the computing power, because of the able to really target on specific fans and really deliver that kind of personalized and customized experience that's going to be critical across all of the different, I keep coming back to the three main levers. There's obviously way more than three main levers in sports, but if you're talking about ticket sales, media rights, partnerships, all of that are moving towards an individualization. There's a somewhat, you might have a different perspective, but obviously there's been somewhat of a move from season tickets to individual ticket sales, media consumption. Instead of buying a whole, they want on a per game basis, or if a lot of fans want on a per game basis, or only want to watch the games even if they're out of market to what they want to watch. On a partnership perspective is, am I getting the right promotions? Am I getting the right content? Am I getting the right information about the companies that I want to get? All of that can be powered by AI and all made a better experience so that people continue to have that level of engagement with sports properties and the sports industry overall.
I think the missing lever to that too, though, is marketing, right? Because all of the things that you mentioned, we have to actually tell our fans about and tell the public about. And there is automation and AI built into marketing platforms as well. We utilize a platform through Major League Baseball that actually does exactly what you talked about. It takes all of the data that we have, all of the data that Major League Baseball has about our consumers, and now we're delivering them the appropriate targeted ad for either season tickets, individual tickets, maybe our brand new Ranger Sports Network and where to consume that. But this platform is finding not only the appropriate products to target our fans with, but also the appropriate platforms. So are we targeting you through search engine and we're pushing a little money there? Are we targeting you through paid ads and we're pushing money there? Are we targeting you through organic social and we're pushing you messaging there? So there are also marketing levers that you can pull that naturally help amplify those three revenue generators that teams really rely on.
And one other further comment I meant to say is one of the real big growth engines in sports right now is mixed-use developments. The city of Arlington being a very notable example. We just featured them in a white paper about mixed-use developments. But using technology to activate real assets or things in real life, I think is something that gets underplayed with artificial intelligence. The idea, if you have all of this new commercial real estate, residential real estate, you're obviously building, potentially renovating or building new stadiums, integrating the technology into those builds to maximize those experiences from a hospitality experiential in real life perspective is also really important. I think the idea, so you don't want to have a separation or a silo of, well, artificial intelligence can only really impact digital or impact, what are traditionally more what people think of from a data-driven perspective, whether it's ticket sales, media rights, or some of the things we've talked about from a partnership perspective. Artificial intelligence can really impact the real-life experience, and that's something to really think about while you're deploying these platforms.
So, as AI and analytics become more central to sports business, obviously there's going to be some ethical and privacy concerns. There's going to be a lot of different kinds of challenges. What challenges do you see, both from ethical and privacy concerns standpoint or others, that we see as we adopt this new technology?
I mean, it's creepy, obviously, is the first thing. I mean, like, right, the amount of information, like, it just on its surface is, you can know a lot about people, right? You can know, I mean, I was talking about really understanding the fan. Well, some may argue, like, well, I don't want you to know about all that about the fan. Is it really a benefit? I think the history of technology, whether it's Meta or Google, is people often complain, but then once they get the services or the products or the offerings, then they typically, that outweighs the ethical concerns, but it's very clearly an ethical concern, right? It's like, do you want all of these companies to know all this information about you? How much, it's not always clear how much they know about you. It's not always clear where all this data is coming from. It's not clear that you've, accepted or agreed to doing this. Obviously, these lawsuits are obviously ongoing, but ChatGPT and a lot of these large language model platforms train their large language models on data that is copyrighted, right? It's not necessarily clear that they got the information. They said there was fair use. This is obviously something still in courts and being debated, but is that something that you want done? Is everything you post on social media, should that be consumed by whether it's Grok or Llama for Meta? Like, should that be something that you automatically agree to do? It's just creepy, right? And there's a lot of personal things. And again, I think as long as you're clear about what you're doing, and as long as you have consent, and as long as you really go out of your way to make it clear, like, this is why we're using the data, and there's a beneficial transaction for all parties involved, I think that's the way forward, and being as clear as possible about that. But I think understanding that there are a lot of good business use cases to do that, and there's a lot of good reason to do it. But obviously, do you want to? And we were just talking. I made a joke, which I don't know if it was a great joke, but like about Minority Report, right? If you had some version of Minority Report, which was a movie that by Steven Spielberg and Tom Cruise, which was like there was a pre-crime division, right? They said like, we know somebody's going to commit a crime, we're going to stop it before it happens. Well, that is really creepy, to stop it before it happens. Like, how do you determine something is happening before it happens, right? That's like obviously a very difficult question to solve. So I think it's, how do you balance the potential privacy and ethical concerns with the obviously utility of using the data?
Yeah, and I think we're going to continue to evolve in the United States to be more like the European model, where everything in the United States is you're automatically opting in. It's instead of you should automatically be opted out, you have to opt in. You also have to have control over your data. You have to be able to write and have everything that you're part of a data set be taken out of that data set, which causes a lot of concern on our side, like the tech side, where we have to be able to handle that. Where right now we ingest tons of social media data every day about you, right? And so if you're following any of these accounts that we follow, technically you're part of that data set, and we have to be able to take you out of that data set. So it's a challenge on our side. We're already trying to think about that. We do have clients that ask us questions about things that they're trying to do what you're describing, and we have to sit and go, hey, as a technology provider, we have to be careful about that. A prime example, we work with the PGA Tour, and one of the things that they've asked us to do is, can you tell us every time a player is broadcast and then which brands they're utilizing, which ones they have contracts with? Sure, we can write a great facial recognition piece of software that can go through and pick out every player and whatever, and we could do that. But we're training on their faces without their knowledge. There's obviously agreements that they do when they're on the PGA Tour and all of that, but these are things that are sort of outside of that idea and that landscape. And while it's okay, court systems are terrible at this. We talk about, you guys, if any of you have ever watched a hearing in Congress with a tech company and you know anything about tech, it's horribly embarrassing. And these are the kinds of people that are going to be adjudicating these laws you're talking about. It's going to take a long time for the things that are sort of out of bounds to actually be out of bounds. So there's a lot to happen in that space, and then everything that we're talking about is still evolving. All of this tech's evolving. What's going to happen, what's going to be able to be possible is continuing to evolve, and the courts are going to take forever to sort it out. So it's kind of a mixed bag of trying to figure out what you're okay with and comfortable with, and what makes sense as a company versus what sort of steps into something that could get you in a weird spot down the road.
From a team perspective, we do a lot of what Brandon said, and part of that is making sure that you're partnering with really trusted companies. You want to review their data guidelines and bylaws to ensure that if you get a call that you need to remove data, that company can do that on your behalf. So first of all, partner with really good and strong companies who have data compliancy front of mind. That's the first piece of it. But internally, what we're trying to do a little bit more intelligently is arm the people in the organization with platforms that have guardrails. So you can't necessarily get outside of a specific scope and get into a space in AI that may turn around and have implications for your organization. Now, that's not always possible with open engine AI, right? Like ChatGPT. So I think conversations with our staff and with our organization are really important because at its core, some AI is biased because it's only as good as the data it ingests, right? And you don't control some of the data that it ingests when it's an open source AI engine. So you just always need to have that in the back of your head as well, especially if you're a student and you're utilizing some of these platforms, is AI can be biased. So make sure you're understanding where it's sourcing some of this information from and really just be upfront about the platforms that you're utilizing. Do the research behind those platforms and make sure they're equipped to give you the information that you need to in a really trusted and vetted way.
Yeah, the only last thing is that's a good point also that all the evidence shows that humans and AI working together is the most effective. And I'm not just saying that because we don't want AI to take all of our jobs, but I'm saying that because it is proven, like you need that combination. You can't just rely on AI to do everything for you. And actually AI does work the best seemingly also when you have domain expertise. So if you really understand the subject that you're using AI for and then use AI, then it can really have a substantial impact. So merging that together, not just from an efficacy perspective, but also from an ethical perspective.
Adam, it's like you saw my questions in advance. So looking at this evolving relationship between data-driven insights and traditional expertise, where are the places where human intuition still just outpaces the technology when it comes to decision making?
Do you want me to answer that?
I would love you to start, and then I'd love everyone to answer.
Yeah, exactly. I think creativity is kind of a amorphous concept, but humans are still very creative, and they can also, even with LLMs, while they're getting better at that, creativity often is taking things from one context and applying it into a new context, which, artificial intelligence still struggles with, particularly large language models. I think people have seen that. They're even multimodal, the idea of using text or images, that's been a long training process and somewhat of a long wind-up. So even those kind of transitions, you were talking about developing facial, that's a non-trivial technical challenge, logo exposure versus facial recognition, and combining those things together. Usually in terms of artificial intelligence and having a specific, artificial specific intelligence, that's typically the best use case when an AI has a very specific task that it's doing. So that's typically what's best. And humans, particularly from a creative cross-domain expertise perspective, I think in the short term particularly, but probably in the near term and long term, using creativity and then pairing that with AI, but humans I think are still going to be better at multi-domain or looking at things across multiple domains from a creativity perspective.
I also think that there's the perspective of human-to-human interaction is a little bit more personable than human-to-computer interaction, right? So when we're giving our sales team some of these AI platforms that we're giving them, Conversica being an example, which is a sales assistant, they really set the stage for our sales rep to have that meaningful interaction with the client. So I think that that's a really good intersection of how you can use AI to make you more efficient, but then the rep comes in and really has that human-to-human interaction to fulfill that sale, right? But for everything that we do internally, whether it has AI or it's just data-driven to some perspective, if we're doing forecasting or dynamic pricing using AI models, there is always the human element of we understand this business to a different degree than the computer does. We have lived it. We have seen fans come in our building And we also know some of those outliers that you can't necessarily program an AI model for. All-Star Game being a really good one. We can identify that we had an All-Star Game in 2024, that our season tickets were likely impacted by it, but it's much broader than just the numbers. So I think that's a really good example of intersectionality of why we still need the expertise in the room when we're making decisions, even though every year those decisions become even more and more driven by data, you still need to weave a human element into it.
I can't believe I'm going to say this. You can't measure everything. Oh, geez, that hurt. That hurt. There's just things, I know. There's just things that you can't, like you can use like stand-in variables. I'm not going to get super nerdy on you, but like it's still a stand-in variable. So we're teaching all of these things. It's still a quantitative element. You're still teaching it numbers. And like we talked about at the very beginning, it's still math. There's just some things that you cannot stick math on all the way. You can do parts of it, trust me, and people will continue to try, but you can't do all of it in math. And so that's where like AI ends, right? It has to be a mathematical representation of something. So you can have stand-in numbers and things that account for things, but it can't account for everything. So that's why the combination is super needed, because someone needs to understand the problem that you're throwing at it as well, because it's the whole, you can ask ChatGPT questions and it can lie to you. And if you don't know it's lying to you, you're just walking away thinking that's right. It's the same kind of concept at scale. Like that's a simple example, but when you give it more complex things to do, you have to know if it's lying to you. Otherwise, you're working off of data-driven insights that aren't real. So there's always still a need for that domain expertise of what's going on, and then understanding that not everything can be mathematically represented yet, I guess.
Yeah. No offense to all the students, but I always say using ChatGPT is like a really good intern, but they still don't know everything. They haven't been in the business as long as a lot of you have. So just remember that. We have a few questions, and Brandon, I'm going to kick this one to you first, but I'd love if you guys have an answer as well. It's very broad. How can brand objectives be measured?
Yeah, it's pretty broad. I mean, ultimately, if you start with the brand objective and you know what you're trying to achieve and you've made some kind of decision regarding how you're going to try to achieve that, then it's really a conversation between how you measure it and what you're trying to achieve. So there's a lot of different ways to measure all of these different things. In sponsorship, for example, where I am, you can obviously look at exposure. You can look at how many people watched it. You can do all of those, but you have to figure out what aligns with what you're trying to achieve at a broader level. Sponsorship is not, it's not a strategy, it's an execution. I think that's something that I'm always trying to tell people. If your strategy is just, we're going to do sponsorship, like you're already messing up. Like you have some other broader thing you're trying to do. If you're a brand, you're trying to get recognition or you're trying to be known. If you're a well-known brand, you're trying to remind people who you are, right? That's part of a bigger strategy. So if you understand that sponsorship is a piece of that strategy, then you can start to figure out how you quantify that or measure it associated with that objective. So it's a very broad question, but in my expertise on the sponsorship side, it's like aligning those two things and knowing that sponsorship is a piece of that strategy and not the entire strategy itself.
Yeah, I think from that perspective, it really is this is almost the converse of what you're saying. There are using metrics to define what exactly success looks like. From a ROAR perspective, we look at explicitly revenue and brand goals. So from a revenue perspective, like, does this partnership translate into dollars? How can you look across the entire marketing and sales funnel and say, if we do these things in this way, to your point about having a strategy, you want to marry strategy and execution, but you want to define what success looks like. And for most companies, defining success is how much money did you make? And you can look at that from a top line revenue perspective or a bottom line profitability perspective, but that's what they're looking for as a return on investment. There should be an expected level of performance across revenue and brand metrics. You should measure that from a partnership perspective to see how a partnership actually performs. And then you can, whether it's media assets or non-media assets, what we do at ROAR particularly is create a language around data that people can communicate to really understand how value is being created. And it's oriented around what are you trying to accomplish? Who are you trying to target? What's the most effective way to reach those audiences? How does a sponsorship across each activation element from a media and non-media perspective align with those goals? And then how do you actually determine if it was successful or not from a revenue and cost basis? And I think the more clearly that's defined, the more likely you are to achieve success, but the more likely everybody's expectations are aligned to achieve success. And that's part of the battle with sponsorship. There's, hopefully there isn't an economic downturn, and obviously there's mixed indications in the macroeconomic environment of whether there's going to be an economic downturn. But one of the things that people do look at, or companies look at quickly, is marketing and spend, because it doesn't seem like marketing and spend directly translates into revenue and sales. So the more quickly, efficiently, and clearly you can tie particularly sports marketing to revenue and the specific objectives of those companies, the more likely A, that revenue is going to stay, but B, even potentially increase, because you're giving people a language to understand revenue, return on investment, and value.
Amazing. Maybe you might have an answer for this one. So this is broad, though. Have you seen brands start to use AI to better understand their ROI on a sports partnership before ever entering the agreement?
Yes, absolutely. I think, and I would actually love your take on this, a little bit more on the understanding the brand side, because we are who we want the brand to pay money to ultimately. But I think the conversations have changed, is why I say yes to that. So I don't think brands are entering into partnerships deals blind anymore. They're not just saying, the media valuation number that you're giving, that's what we want back. They're actually coming into the conversation with expectations, and their expectations are changing. So they want to be a better competitor in market. They want to amplify their brand value, not just have a static number that we're giving them. So I think the conversations have shifted a lot, which is what leads me to believe that yes, those brands are utilizing AI platforms, and they are becoming more knowledgeable about the product that we are selling. I think that some brands actually partner with companies like Brandon's, where they're diving into the metrics as well. So it's not just us giving them that information, they're diving in advance and better understanding what the landscape looks like. And I think brands are getting more intelligent with their money. They don't have money to spend with everybody, so they have to ask the right questions and have the right KPIs in place to spend their money effectively with the right partner.
Yeah, I would say the most discrete example that we have is understanding if the Rangers fan is a customer, we'll say of Globe Life for this example, but right, these decisions, particularly naming rights decision, is a multi-million-dollar decision that typically is going in front of the CEO, the CFO, the board of directors, or the senior management team of companies. Sports sponsorship can be, particularly if you talk about Globe Life, the most visible marketing element of a company. So they really do need to understand what is the potential value of the partnership. One way to do that is to understand, is the Rangers fan a Globe Life customer? How do you decide that's the case? Are they consuming content? What is that journey to say? If we saw, like I said earlier, like if we saw something in stadium, on TV, in social media, if we've interacted with the team in some way, what is the probabilistic opportunity to translate into sales? How much are teams fans spending on or how many purchases are they making? How much are they spending with a company? It really comes back to, can you really tie it back into revenue? The other thing is one that and you can obviously go into this more, but what is the likely, if your goal is to maximize brand awareness or brand perception or brand exposure, are we doing the things that are most likely to do that? Are we maximizing where assets are placed in venue? Are we having the types of social media campaigns, whether that's with athletes, whether that's with coaches, whether that's with the front office, that's going to put our brand front and center? Are we doing business back opportunities? What are the opportunities to integrate with a venue, integrate with a team, where we know we can get direct revenue back from a spend? All of those can use data. There's a platform by an agency, Elevate, called Epic, where they've trained an artificial intelligence platform to be its own kind of, you can create fan personas directly through the AI, and you can ask the AI questions saying, we are now essentially acting as if we are the Rangers fan. What would you like to know about how partnerships could be activated? And you can ask the AI directly, and they will give you responses as if you were conducting a focus group. So yes, companies are definitely using it. They're definitely asking more data-driven questions, and they're definitely expecting to have more, as you were just talking about, more robust validation of their assumptions before a partnership even does, and then on an ongoing basis.
It's a slow trickle. I mean, we have some brand clients that are very leaned in and want to do a lot of stuff with better understanding ROI, like where we can be in, what gives us our most visibility, what helps us with that. But we still would love to see more going after your side, like kind of coming in empowered. We've worked on both sides before for partnerships, and that's been really interesting to have everybody working off the same data and really having the same conversations. But it's still a majority of these big naming rights deals are still because the CEO wants to play golf with the guy who's making the deal or whatever. It's not to the state where we want it to be in the industry, where it's being made on more specific data-driven insights and things of that nature. I talked to a really big brand really recently, and she was frustrated because of that. She was wanting to measure all these things and great outcomes, and he was like, I love the perks of the deal. And we get a suite, man, like you can't measure that. It was like, oh, it's exhausting. So there's still a lot of that going on in the industry, and we'd love to see more brands being more empowered by that.
The ultimate goal of a brand, though, is to drive revenue back to them, right? And it doesn't matter how they want to do that or where they see that the gap is. But if they ultimately want to make more money, they're going to challenge each team to come up with the best mix of assets that does that for them. Whether that's in-park signage, whether that's digital rights, whether that's being able to directly communicate with our fans, they will continue to be more knowledgeable in that space, and they will continue to challenge brands and companies to be able to do that. And they're asking better questions and the right questions as the years progress.
Awesome. That is all the time we have. Thank you guys so much. Appreciate it.